This episode is brought to you by Act Now Education. Go to www.actnoweducation.com for free comprehensive educational resources and opportunities for active duty, veterans, military spouses, and children.
At the time. And so I think what it really came down to was like I was just frustrated by the very end. I was just, I was growing frustrated. And so I was ready to get out. But I didn't recognize that, I had some PTSD, right? Like you don't go to Afghanistan or Iraq or anything like that and probably not come out with it. And I always felt sort of weird, right? Because everybody's experiences were different.
Thank you for tuning in today, folks. I'm your host, KP. Today's guest is not only a military veteran, but is also a professional who is part of one of the largest growing industries of online learning platforms, Coursera. They offer an incredible online educational learning experience that offers courses from schools such as Yale and companies like Google to ambitious professionals all around the world. What's even more special, Coursera has free educational opportunities for our military community, and that is all in part to Coursera members such as Mike, and that is why we have him on the show today. Mike decided that his time serving wasn't over when he left the military. He still continues serving today by providing our military community support within his current organization. So Mike, thank you for joining us today.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Mike served in the United States Army in 2009 to 2016, and he was enlisted for 4 years active duty and an additional 3 years as a commissioned officer. He is a proud graduate of the University of Texas at San Antonio. On top of that, Mike has a number of additional IT credentials and software management certifications in which he earned throughout his career. So before we jump into Coursera, Mike, I'd like to learn a little bit about you as a person and as a military veteran. Where are you originally from, and what was your upbringing like?
Yeah, so originally I'm from San Antonio, Texas, from the south side of the city. It's a great area, but like a lot of other areas, it has some challenges. Um, Growing up, it had its difficulties, but my parents always really tried to keep me on the right path. Those around me sometimes weren't always able to make just weren't always able to make the same decisions, or just couldn't based on the circumstance. But like most of the areas out here on the south side, a majority of the population, at least from what I could see, typically free and reduced lunch. So that's what would typically be considered as a low income area. And growing up like that's a little bit different, right? So when you have your experiences and when you connect with people, whether it was in the military or post-military, you talk about your experiences and how you grew up. And it sounds very different than, the way mine sounded very different from the way everybody else did. So, like I said, my neighborhood wasn't the worst, but it probably wasn't the best either. And so, being one of the few in the neighborhood to really go to college, I had a lot of folks rallying around me and supporting me to go to college. But I was really like the only grandkid that up to that point that had gone to college. So, really one of the first in the family. And so sort of charting that path and going forward was, it was different, right? Because normally you look to others, especially as a younger person, to sort of guide you. And so, so that experience growing up, really the only people ever knowing who had a degree of any sort were those, counselors and teachers and things like that you had, in the school. And so that sort of set me on that path of, what do I do? And, first sergeant always used to say, you used to always refer and say, they don't know what they don't know. Right. And so that was me as well. What was I going to do? I don't know, but I knew a bunch of people that were teachers. And so I thought that that's what I should do. And so that's sort of where that journey took me through, through UTSA, to eventually get to, to earn my degree. But, growing up, I'm not going to say it was like the toughest thing in the world, but it wasn't easy either. Your eyes really open up, especially when you get outside of the scope of, your localized area, and you really get to meet people from other places and you hear about their experiences. But you also realize like there are different opportunities in lots of different places. And even from just one side of the city of San Antonio to the other. I volunteered in college going to, the schools on the north side, and recognized right away that the level of education that they were getting seemed to be quite different than what I got, when I was in school. Now, maybe it was just that couple years difference, or maybe there's something to that, so it was just different like that. And so, when we think about, what is it like to grow up in one of these areas, like I said, it has its challenges. And so one of the things I really learned was really persistence, and persistence pays off. And I think that's for most of us that grew up in an area, like I said, maybe wasn't the best, maybe wasn't the worst, but you learn persistence if you're going to, if you're going to achieve anything, and there's going to be a lot of people to help you along the way, but persistence is key there.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I come from a similar background, and I agree 100% with the persistence thing, because I definitely was not the smartest guy, but I knew what goals I wanted. And similar to you, like my mom didn't graduate from college. There wasn't a whole lot of emphasis on education. I mean, my dad wanted me to go to college, but he didn't know much about it. So I think there's something to be said about someone like yourself who can kind of see and create their own goals that are outside of their surroundings in their environment. It takes a special person to do that. It's really, really humbling experience. It sounds like in a solid background where you come from. I'm sure a lot of military veterans can identify with everything that you're saying. Can you share with us why you decided to join the military, and what did you do, when you were enlisted and as a commissioned officer?
Yeah, so I wish I could say that I had the most patriotic reason for joining. I know some of my comrades and some of my battle buddies, they did. It's one of those things where I was towards the end of my time in college, and I was coming up on my final year, and I worked 2 jobs while I was in college. I stocked shelves overnight at a Home Depot, and I was a substitute teacher during the day. Like I said, I thought I was going to be a teacher. I realized really quickly that teaching wasn't going to be for me. And so I had a lot of, I had a lot of concern as to like what I would eventually do, but I knew that I needed to finish college. So here I am, my junior year of college, just finishing up, and all of the money that I had made, I continued to put it into college. Right, I paid for summer classes, everything like that. So it came back, no financial aid, things like that, and so it was like one of those things, like, well, what do I do now, right? And so I remember asking my mom, like, hey, do you think you co-sign a loan for me? Because I need to pay for this final year of college. I love my mom. My mom's helped me so much. And, both my parents have, I remember she said, it was, this is 2007, 2008-ish. So if you remember what the economy was like back then, it was pretty rough. And there was a lot of, really bleak job outlooks. Right. And so, as you said, like sometimes neither one of my parents went to college. And so they only knew about the concept of college. Right. My mom worked in a school as a secretary, so she understood like college can get you places, but it's one of those things where she also saw a lot of those kids go to college and sometimes never be able to earn a job. You know what I mean? And so I remember she said, I want to help you, but I don't know that I can co-sign a loan. How do I know you're going to get a job? That's tough to hear, but from her perspective, she worked, they worked their whole lives to continue to be able to provide and things like that. So, who am I to go wreck that? She was supportive in every way. I remember thinking, all right, well, it's that persistence thing again, right? So I remember thinking, okay, well, what do I do now? And I remember seeing a commercial for the Army, and back then they were trying to get anybody that they could, right? Back in 2007,
Yes.
2008, right? So
Yes, I
they're
remember.
offering all sorts of stuff, right? So I remember they were offering enlistment bonuses, pay off your student loans, all that kind of stuff. And so I was like, all right, let's do this. So I walked over to a recruiter's office. I said, hey, man, like, what can I do? They were getting ready to drop me from all the classes that I signed up for. I need to pay for this. I need proof that I can pay for it. He's like, let me take you to the back and take this like quick little test real quick. And so he gave me like that practice as bad. And he's like, all right, let's go over to the real one. He took me over to the real one. And he's like, you can get whatever job you want. I was like, cool. I was like, let's do it. Let's figure out which one has the best sign-on bonus. So I ended up enlisting as a tank mechanic. But it was the coolest thing in the world. They let me finish out my degree, let me finish and graduate from college, and then go off to basic training. But I'd signed the contract. It had my sign-on, my enlistment bonus, all that kind of stuff in there. And so I remember after that day, I came home and I was like, hey, Ma, I was like, check it out. I got proof that I paid this loan back. And I don't know why I thought that was going to be a good idea, but she started freaking out, right? She's like, what did you do? What did you do? She started crying. I felt so bad. She's like, go tell your father what you did, and my dad's like, oh, mijo, that's cool. That's cool, mijo. That's awesome, And I was like, stop telling him, how moms get, right? Moms get worried. And so that was sort of my experience, right? So I didn't join necessarily, like I said, for the most patriotic reasons. But once when I was in, like that all changed, right? Like that whole breakdown when you're in basic training, that whole just a reverence and a an awe, and it's just a spectacular feeling, right? To be part of the military and to be able to serve with an organization that has a purpose like what ours is around the world, right? So although I didn't join for those reasons, by the time I was in, I was fully into this mindset that like we have purpose, and I have purpose in life, right? I went through basic training, all that kind of stuff, AIT, and so I learned to work on tanks. And then when I got stationed at Fort Bliss, it was my first duty assignment, 2nd Brigade, 1st Armored Division, right? So get stuck at Fort Bliss. They tell us, hey, we don't really have tanks. We have these things called MATVs. And I was like, oh, cool, what's that, right? And so now it's like, you're learning something different, right? Now I have to learn MATVs and how, and MRAPs and things like that, and how to work on those vehicles. And so it's like, it's one of those things where the folks in the military don't realize it, at least I didn't at the time, that you're very agile, right? You're very adaptable. And so you find patterns and you find commonalities in everything that you do. And that's going to be very, very important for some of the stuff that we talk about later on, probably, right? Like finding commonalities and how to think about your experience and translating it to the corporate world. But, you have to find the thing that resonates with you. So for me, it was, okay, well, in tanks, it's electricity. In diesel vehicles, it's not much different, but it's also gas, right? Like something connects something somewhere. And so you have to just figure out the commonalities so you can have it in your mind, right? So it makes the adaptability a little bit easier and the learning, not as steep of a learning curve. And so, I had my time at Fort Bliss. It was a rough time at Fort Bliss. Not gonna lie, it was a challenge to be there. But like I said, I learned a lot. My battle buddies, my comrades, all of them. A lot of us still talk to this day. It was a great experience. And like I said, I joined the military having a degree, and so that has its. People were going to assume things based on the fact that you came in as a specialist, right? Like it's a mark right on your chest, and people know automatically who you are, and this, that you have this degree, right? And once when you're in, you're all essentially, eating rank until so of course you start progressing. But once I was in, I remember, thinking, okay, well, my recruiter said, like, once I got to the regular military, maybe I could just go in and become an officer. And it didn't seem that difficult, but it turns out it's actually quite difficult. I spent the entire time that I was there at Fort Bliss attempting to convince somebody that I was good enough to actually be a commissioned officer. I had a team chief named Staff Sergeant Mustache, and Staff Sergeant Mustache took care of me. I mean, he for years, like he was my team chief for like 3 years, 2.5, 3 years. And for all those years, he continued to fight for me and put in that good word with every new commander that came in. Hey, Lopez is good. Lopez wants to do this. Can you do it? And they would give some requirements, right? Like, I need to see him do this or do that or whatever. So it took a couple of years, but I'll never forget, right? His name was Captain Riley. Captain Riley was getting ready to change command, and Sergeant Mustache went back over and said, hey, sir, can we get this? I mean, this kid's been doing, whatever, right? He interviewed me on the spot. He said, he talked to me, tried to understand my goals and things like that. And then he said, yeah, I'll push this forward. And so in that moment, they pushed everything forward. They sent up my recommendation. Everything got signed, went through the board eventually, all that kind of stuff. But it's one of those things, like, I feel like I was really lucky that I had a team chief that really took care of me. And so those are the things that I'll remember for the rest of my life. You know what I mean? Like, I'll always remember Sergeant Mustache, and anything that, I can do for him to help him, that's going to be one of those things, whether he gets out of the military one day or whether he stays in, whatever it is I can do to help, right? Like, he's the reason it set me on this next path. And so I earned my commission as I went to OCS, earned my commission, got selected to be a signal corps officer. So I did a lot of routing and switching and stuff like that. And my first assignment was, after the basic leaders course, was to 25th Signal Battalion, as headquartered in, basically they were headquartered in Kuwait, but with detachments and like Qatar and in Afghanistan itself. And so I get to Qatar, whatever, and like, this is gonna be awesome, right? I'm in Qatar for a year, and as soon as I get there, like the next day, they're like, here's your TDY orders to Afghanistan. You're going as soon as you get all of your gear. And I was like, I didn't expect that, right? And so I get to Afghanistan, right? And that's where I met a really, really great, leader. I met two of them, actually. Captain Gilmore, who was my company commander, and First Sergeant Frier, who was the first sergeant and taught me a lot. I get there, and so we're running networks we're basically like the operations and maintenance for Afghanistan. So, we have like different lieutenants out in different places. So I was actually stationed probably in the northern region, in Mazar-e Sharif or Camp Marmal. And so I had to learn a lot, right? Because I'd never done anything in routing or IT or anything like that. And they're like, here you go, here's this help desk, here's like all of this, and by the way, like everything has to be on, and people have to be able to communicate. But then it goes back to that adaptability, right? And that agility, and think about, okay, well, how can I understand these concepts a little bit better? So in tanks, it was electricity. In diesel vehicles, it's electricity and fuel, right? but in routing and switching, it's light. How does light transfer from one place to the other to transmit data? And so I was able to wrap my brain around the concepts of networking and switching, by using analogies to sort of realize it back. And then talking to people, right? Like they tell you all the time when you're networking, you're like, oh, you got to network, you got to talk to people. That don't just happen once when you get out of the military, right? Like that happens inside of it. I was lucky enough to be surrounded by brilliant contractors, like brilliant contractors. I mean, these folks were amazing, and they were really there to impart their wisdom. Sure, they were there to do a job, but I mean, what else were they going to do if they just did that? And so you could ask them questions and you could talk to them and you could ask them, but I don't understand this. And they go over there and they draw it on the board for you, right? And they diagram it all out for you. And so I was very lucky in that regard that I had some folks there that were not only, leaders that were going to help me, but also, contractors, and sort of help me learn that. And so that was my time in the military. I it's a story of persistence and a story of, agility and adaptability. Once I left there, I went to, I got stationed in Hawaii as part of the 25th Infantry Division, and I became the battalion at 6. And I had to learn a new technology because when I was in Afghanistan, we were running, fiber optic networks and, data centers, basically the network enterprise center, right? And then you get to Hawaii and it's like, oh, by the way, here's this portable satellite terminal. And here's a group of folks that run, radios and things like that. And we expect everything to work, right? Like that's just the expectation of a battalion of 6. And it's like, oh, well, I don't know this stuff. So like you have to go back, you have to ask a bunch of other people and you have to learn a new technology all over again and stuff like that. So that was sort of my experience in the military throughout, was just constantly, seeing a challenge, finding a way to analyze it and find an analogy for how I can understand the technology or whatever it is I need to do, have the persistence and talk to others that could sort of help me walk to make that path a little bit easier.
Yeah, I can understand where you're coming from when you talk about some of the things you just mentioned. So, you never forget the folks who go to bat for you. I think everyone who's had a military career of some sort can go back and say, well, this person and this person really stuck their neck out for me and went to bat for me and believed in me. And I'm the same as you. And there's people that I can name off that throughout my career, my journey, that didn't have to, but they saw something in me, went to vouch for me. And you never forget those folks. And then secondly, what you're talking about, your last minute orders, I had the same thing happen to me where certain brigades were getting deployed. And I just wanted a heads up. And I literally get to Hawaii and they're like, well, you got 30 days. You're going to go to Iraq. And I'm like, whoa, I just got out of OBC. I'm still a second lieutenant. Like I was like, not even no time on the ground for garrison training or nothing, man, or getting acclimated to the unit. It was like, all right, get down range. But that was in 2004. So that was kind of at the height of everything. So everybody was going. Everybody was wearing combat patches back then. So I sound like an old man just talking about it right now, but it didn't seem that long ago, really, Yeah,
it's crazy when you get there too, right? Because you're like, what do you expect? Like you don't, again, you don't know what you don't know, right? Like you don't know what to expect. They can give you a briefing, you can talk to other people, but
exactly,
one of those experiences is going to be like, you sort of have to learn it. When I got boots on ground into Afghanistan, and I sort of, I was hanging around Bagram for like a month before they sent me to take on my assignment in the north. I'll never forget getting to that assignment in the north, and going to have to talk to the general of the base, basically, right? Because I'm the communications guy, and him telling me, like, hey, this is, I get it, you're a second lieutenant, but you're the expert here. So I don't want to hear second lieutenant answers. I want to know, what you're talking about, right? And so that's a lot of pressure to put on somebody that hasn't done it, right? So you sort of like, again, like it goes back to all of the things you learn, right? Like all of the intangibles you learn in the military are really those things. It's like, how do you deal under pressure? Well, I would say that we're like, we're ice cold under pressure, right? Like we don't budge under pressure. And when it comes to, the ability to learn something new, we sort of have to, because like, how are you going to go tell somebody you don't know how to do it?
Yeah.
Like you go find somebody that knows how to do it. You go read a technical manual, whatever it is. If you don't know a regulation, you go read the Army regulations and you go find it. Like, this is just the way that we operate. And so we take these experiences into the corporate world as well. It's just sometimes we don't always articulate them in that way, but we learned a lot, and I'm sure you did too as soon as you hit the ground in Iraq.
Oh yeah, man. And you know what? I'm glad that you said that about, adaptability, because a lot of service members and veterans don't identify that adaptability skill set that they hone and they sharpen while they're in the military. And like you said, it's important to highlight that when you're talking to civilian recruiters and when you're trying to describe yourself and sell yourself to a potential employer. So after 6 years of being in the military, what made you decide to transition out of the military?
Yeah, so that's it's one of those that I'm tired to get out at the time, and so I think what it really came down to was like I was just frustrated by the very end. I was just I was growing frustrated, and so I was ready to get out, but I didn't recognize that I had some PTSD, right? Like you don't go to Afghanistan or Iraq or anything like that and probably not come out with it. And I always felt sort of weird, right? Because everybody's experiences were different, and so mine wasn't, mine was not as probably as bad as other people's, right? And so I kept hearing this thing in my mind that yours can't be that bad because this or that, right? Like all you heard were explosions. The explosions never hit you. They just came, nearby or close by to where you were. Maybe they shook the building you were in. Maybe they rattled you awake. Maybe you saw, a CRAM take out something above you, but it wasn't you, right? Like you weren't the one. Like I'm pretty sure, you've probably had your experiences going out the wire and things like that. Like my experiences weren't like that. So I always felt like, how could mine really be that bad? This isn't PTSD. This is just something else. And that starts to weigh on you. So like I said, I went to Qatar or pretty much Afghanistan, and we PCS by ourselves. It's an assignment, it's like a rotation. So you get there, you do your year, and then you get assigned to a new duty station. So it's not like you go over there with a group of people and you leave with a group of people and you have this support when you get back. I'll give them their credit. They actually try to do a really good job of making us see a chaplain and go through like a reorientation back to like what is it like to interact in the regular world again. But as soon as you come back from, as soon as you left Afghanistan, you're still on this adrenaline rush, right? Or Iraq, right? You're still on this adrenaline rush, and no matter what people tell you, it's just not going to happen. You're just not ready to hear anything that anybody has to say. So you go through this orientation, whatever they sent me back, and it wasn't until I got to Hawaii and I started to spend a lot of time by myself, away from other people, that I started to I didn't like the sound of fireworks. I didn't like the smell of fireworks. Like that smell of sulfur. I didn't like these things, right? And I was growing frustrated with that. I was isolated. I was by myself. Sure, I had other people in my, in the team that I worked on, and I saw people every day. But what that really meant was I didn't like to be by myself. So I was working. I get up at 4:30 in the morning. You probably remember what Hawaii was like, right? You have to get up like 4:30 in the morning to make it on the Schofield because of that left turn into the base coming from like the west side of the island.
It's awful.
Yeah, so it's like so you get up early, you get there, whatever, and you're there for the whole day, and your entire day as a commissioned officer is typically putting out fires, going to command and staff, going to these different meetings, stuff like that. And so like all of the work you need to get done, you get it done in the evening. And so I stay at work late at night, 2000, 2100, and then go home, eat, and maybe watch a little bit of TV because I didn't really want to be by myself. But what that really did was just overwork me. So all of these things sort of compounded together. And I was like, all I could think about was like, man, I really want to go back to Afghanistan. I had this idea in my mind that Afghanistan was so much better than what I was going through at the moment. Because when you're there, everything sort of goes away, right? Like you're living off of adrenaline in these combat zones. My soldiers used to ask me, "Hey, sir, why would you want to go back?" And I would say things like, I'd ask them if they ever, like, do they cook, right? And they'd say, "Well, of course." I'm like, "Do you use seasonings?" And they would say, "Yes." I said, "Okay, now imagine cooking food without seasonings." When you go there, you have this different experience, right? And you sort of come back and you don't have that adrenaline anymore. So how do you get it back? Well, there's really only a couple of ways, either you do like, really extreme things, or you go back, or you don't get it.
Right.
And so it's sort of a difficult thing to sort of be by yourself and having all of these feelings that you've never had before. And the pressures of work and all of these different things sort of all combining on you. And then just going back to your place by yourself and not really feeling like you can talk to anybody, because who's going to understand? Again, that sort of self-doubt that I had, that my experience wasn't that bad, because granted, it probably wasn't, but I still had these emotions and I didn't talk to anybody because my fear was, well, if I go to behavioral health, what if somebody sees me? And then what if they question the decisions I make? We're leaders, we make decisions and we make decisions with lots of different things. And so what happens if people start to question that decision based on the fact that they saw you go there? Again, all these thoughts are sort of, they're not realistic really, right? Like they're sort of unrealistic. It's just something that you create in your mind and it stops you from going and seeing things. So all of these things combined, like I said, by the end, I was truly frustrated. I had all these emotions. I didn't know what to do. And so I was just like, you know what? I can't go back to Afghanistan. I can't deal with this anymore.
Yeah.
It's time for me to get out. And I'll never forget, I had a leader tell me one day, the moment that this is no longer fun for you, the moment this is not everything you expected anymore, and you're a leader, it's time for you to leave, because everybody picks up on those emotions, and your soldiers see it, the people around you see it. And so that was sort of one of those moments where I had to think, okay, what is best for the people that I'm, that are reporting to me? Is it good that I'm constantly frustrated all the time? Is a sergeant first class tell me, hey sir, when you come in, you're at 9, and the littlest thing puts you at 10 with everybody. She's like, the soldiers see that, and you need to figure out how to manage that, because they see you, they work in the same office as you. And she would keep me grounded too. And so I could appreciate that. That's those non-commissioned officers, all of that experience they have. And so she sort of kept me kind of grounded and really thinking about the vibe that I was giving off in the office and things like that. But ultimately what it came down to was like, I was just frustrated and wanted to get out. And so I made that decision to get out.
Yeah.
I remember we had a change of command. The new commander came over and was like, hey, LT, I had all these ideas for what was going to happen with the battalion at 6. And he asked me my goals and things like that. And I said, sir, in about 3 days, my refrad packet is going to be submitted to the S1. Don't think that's what he was expecting to hear, for his 3rd day in command. But, he asked me some questions about why. And so I started explaining, it's just time for me to move on. And, I appreciate everything that I did in the military. I'll never forget it, but it's time for me to go, because I had this idea that if I got out, that would be better for me in the long run, or that something would change. But ultimately it doesn't. You get out and those feelings are still there until you actually deal with them. And so, that's what I'll say is that was my decision. My reason for leaving and things like that was to sort of get my life back. But ultimately what it came down to is I really just, you have to understand the real reason why you're getting out. Otherwise you're not going to make, and you're not going to plan correctly. You're not going to make the right decisions.
Yeah, man, a lot of what you just said, I can relate to. Just, it's too bad that is the way that it is. Cause even when I came back from my deployment, like I wasn't myself for years, and it's almost like you're running from yourself in a certain sense until you face those issues that you have. Things for you are not going to ever feel whole or 100%. I know where you're coming from when you say that. Actually, I can go more into that, but I want to try to stay on topic with, leading into Coursera and, your whole journey with that. But thank you for sharing that. That really does mean a lot to me. I wasn't expecting that kind of answer. So what initially started your path into IT and online education?
So I got this idea that because I was a commissioned officer as an IT, as a signal corps officer, you hear all of these things, like these rumblings in the military, especially as you're getting out. Oh, IT officers or signal corps officers could be really in demand in the corporate world, and it's not the same as it is in the in the military. And you hear all these things, right? Like, oh, everybody's chirping in your ear that these are the best things. You go to the transition assistance program, and they're like, oh yeah, this is it, right? So I thought, okay, IT is the place to go. I do nerd stuff. Like, I do nerd stuff in the Army, so maybe I'll just do nerd stuff in real life, right? And so that was sort of what got me on that pathway. Really, ultimately, what set me in on that path was the fact that I was commissioned as a signal corps officer, because when I went through OCS, they were doing this thing where you stack ranked all of the branches that you wanted, and depending on your rank in the class, they sort of did like a draft day board, and they figured out where you were going to go. I guess they got tired of maybe they got tired of only certain branches being left and people not wanting to be in them, whatever. So they try to give everybody something within their top 3. And I was lucky enough that my score was high enough, and I was selected to be a commissioned officer in the Signal Corps after OCS. And so, I went to that leaders course. Like I said, I enjoyed this stuff. It was kind of cool. Went to Afghanistan, had the coolest experience, like I said, I've ever had. Nothing in my life will ever compare to that experience. The people, the place, everything about it was just like, it was just an interesting time in my life, and something that will stay with me forever. That set me on that pathway. I learned a lot from those contractors. I learned a lot from those soldiers that were there. I had fiber guys, I had everything, and they taught me how to do all of that stuff. So I thought it was the coolest stuff in the world. So when I got out, I was like, well, where should I go? And I had this idea that California is where all the technology is again, right? Like, I didn't realize technology is all over the country and all over the world. But I thought, you know what, this is where the technology is at, because this is the only place I've ever heard about it. And so I got out, and I had this intention of, being in IT. But then I started to find out really quickly that it's not necessarily as easy as they make it seem. You put together your resume and you try and explain what it was that you've done. But how do you explain to somebody that you were a commissioned officer that ran networks, architected network designs, ran help desk functions, and also did like secured porta johns because, conflict of interest sometimes for the S4 to do it, right? Like, how do you explain all of these different things that you've done? It's really hard to like narrow it down. And you think that by telling people all of these experiences that you have, that it's going to make sense. So what I started getting callbacks for was like, do you want to be a help desk administrator? I'm like, not really. I mean, I had people that used to do that and I could probably learn it, but I used to manage the whole thing. Like, why would I want to go be that person, And so another one, like, do you want to be a software engineer? I'm like, I'm not a software engineer. I know how to manage things, right? Like, this is my bread and butter is management of technology stuff. And so I started to find it a bit challenging. And I went through recruiting agencies and things like that. And I'll never forget that I went through one of them, and they put me up for, this interview for a position in somewhere here in California. Right. And, the interview went nice, but it was something related to like manufacturing. Mm-hmm. And I remember kept thinking like, well, I want to do technology, but at the same time, you sort of got to go with what you have, right? Because every time somebody asks you what you want to do, you probably did the same thing. I'll do whatever, right? Because we do whatever in the military. I was a tank mechanic. I worked on MAT-Vs. I was a MAT-V mechanic. I worked on, networks. So you just do whatever it is it's asked of you. And so those are sort of my responses all the time.
Right.
So I go through these interviews, and what it really cemented for me was that I didn't want to do anything but technology. And so I remember at the end of the interview, it was an on-site interview, and they asked me like, what do you think about third shift? And I basically said, no, I don't want to do third shift. And I'll never forget, the recruiting agency called me back and said, why would you tell them that? I'm like, well, I kind of got out of the military to get my life back. Like, why would I go to third shift? And so it was like, and I remember saying, I was like, I kind of really wanted to do something in technology. And I remember they told me, well, you won't get a job in technology unless you have a CISSP. So you might as well just take this one. And that hit a chord with me, because I was like, well, I know you don't need a CISSP. Like, I guess if I was going to be like something in security, maybe, but maybe they're also right. Maybe I should just take what is available to me. And so I mulled it over for a little bit, and I talked to my roommate. My roommate was like, no, it's like, go to a different one. And so I went to a different one, and the guy that ended up being a recruiter for me, I happened to have a connection through the Air Force Academy to the guy that would end up being my boss. And I was able to be brought on as a contractor at a consulting. Well, I was brought on as a consultant to a consulting firm. We contracted for Cisco Systems. And the way that this company worked was they hired pretty much ex-military officers. It's a company called Solutions ATI Consulting. The guy that runs it, Eddie Porta, he's a phenomenal dude. I think he was an Air Force pilot. The guy that ended up being my manager was an Air Force intel guy. And so we had this community of ex-military people that when I got there, I was able to lean on them to understand how to interact in the corporate world. I remember the idea basically being, like, I can teach you the ins and outs of business, but I can't teach you the intangibles. And so when I got there, they started teaching me the ins and outs of business, right? Like how to interact in the corporate environment and things like that. And that's going to be really important for the listeners, right? Because when you come out of the military, the things that you do in the military do not always translate in this way. That bottom line up front thing does not really work all that well in the corporate world. You need to give context. You need to sort of be a little bit more approachable and things like that. You don't want to be considered that person that's just like very robotic and dogmatic and unapproachable. And so they taught me all of these things. And so I was forever lucky that even though I didn't plan anything the way I was supposed to, I didn't plan at all. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I sort of fell in the lap of this consulting firm that took me in, and I was able to resonate with people that were like me. And the reason why that's important is because when you go to a job, whether you go to a consulting firm or not, they're going to have these ERGs, right? And employee resource groups and things like that, where you may find other veterans and people to connect with to help you understand how to come into that culture. And so they were able to help me into that culture and succeed there as a consultant for Cisco Systems. And that started me on my pathway. From there, again, just like I did when I was in Afghanistan and I talked to contractors and I understood what they were doing, I was talking to everybody. I was talking to the solutions architects. I was talking to the software engineers. I was talking to the business people. I was talking to the change management folks. I was talking to everybody and just trying to understand, what is it that y'all do and how do you do it, right? And looking at their approaches to different things. Look at their approaches to problem solving. Look at the way they build their project plans. Look at how they talk with others. Like all these different things. Like I was just soaking it up. And that is actually what gave me the experience and the confidence in order to move on and eventually get to where I got to with Coursera. I went to another online learning company first. And I took all of the experiences I learned in the 2.5 years as a consultant there. I think I did pretty well there. And then Coursera approached me if I wanted to come in and do a role. I'd never done that role before, the one I do now at Coursera. During the interview process, I felt a little weird because I'd never done it. But I kept thinking, okay, Mike, you've done this, you've changed everything, every single time. Like there's no point in time. You started off with history, anthropology, you went to mechanics, you went from mechanics, and so on and so forth, right? So I had to sort of get over this idea that, you're not good enough to do this position because you've never done it. It's really bringing the parallels of what I've done in the past and explaining those and articulating those in a way that would make sense to these people that I was talking to. And, it was good enough, right? They ended up hiring me. I came on as an implementation manager. And that's sort of how I got into what I do now is, I had project management experience. I had a PMP. I was a certified Scrum Master. And so when you come into an organization, you're doing project management. Doesn't matter whether you're doing software applications or anything else. If you know how to do project management, you sort of know how to do it. And that's sort of for the listeners, one of those things like you've done projects in the military, whether you recognize it or not. You've done them all the time. You've done them as a junior non-commissioned officer all the way up through the ranks. You've probably even been an assistant project manager as a specialist, right? So you've done these things. You just need to know how to articulate them. And that's going to help, and that helped me thinking back to all of my experiences. Okay. And giving me the confidence to say, you know what, I've changed jobs so many times. If I can convince these people, I know I'll be able to succeed. And you just go in and you're persistent about everything you learn. And so that's sort of how I got on the path to where I eventually ended up and where I am currently.
That's really interesting. I just had an interview with Josh Canio from DOL Coach, and he described the same thing where he said, I can remember doing project management all the way back in high school. And a lot of people don't realize that. And it's extremely important, especially when you're trying to market yourself to a potential, employer. All right. So now I'd like to talk about the position that you have right now. I'd like to shift the conversation to talk about Coursera and the educational organization that you work for. And so can you explain the significance of Coursera and what is your position with them?
Yeah. So what I do now is I'm a enterprise implementation manager. So I work on the enterprise side, working with our corporate clients when they make purchases of the Coursera learning solution. I'm the one that goes through and implements it for them. So I do all of the configurations. I talk to them, understand their objectives, things like that. Make sure that I'm setting up things in the way that's going to best meet their needs. And like I said, how did I get started there? Sort of by dumb luck. I was working at a different company, at a competitor actually, and I had enterprise in my name. I worked with engineers at that other one, and so they reached out and they said, "Hey, we have this position. It looks like you may be a good fit. Would you be open to talking?" And so I wasn't really looking at the moment, but I heard them out, and that's an important thing for your listeners. Listen to people. You never know whether it's going to pique your interest or not. You never know whether it's going to be the company, whether it's going to be something they say, whether it's going to be the hiring process, whatever it is. Just hear them out sometimes. If it remotely aligns to what you're thinking about, I get it. Don't just listen to random pitches all the time. But if it remotely aligns to what you're interested in, then go for it. And so I heard them out, and the things that they talked about, really resonated with me. And so I continued to go on through the interview process, and there's a great interview process. I had a phenomenal interviewers, and they were really curious about my background and were really willing to hear the things that I had to say and my approaches to things. So I felt like this was going to be a good company where I could grow and succeed at. And like I said, I'd never done the job before. I'd never been an implementation manager before necessarily, but I'd implemented projects. So I took this idea that, well, I've done something similar. I probably just have to learn what it is that they're doing, and then I'll be able to figure it out. And so that's sort of how I ended up there and doing enterprise, project, enterprise implementation, project management, basically, and doing my part to help companies succeed if they can through online learning.
I've always seen things as kind of a journey, an azimuth, and as you're walking in a certain direction, things will present themselves to you, and you can either accept them or you can turn them down. And that's kind of sounds like what happened when it came to deciding whether or not to join the Coursera team. So absolutely amazing. Can you tell us some of the certifications that are currently being offered and maybe talk about what type of institutions, they're being offered from?
Yeah, so Coursera hosts a lot of content created by our partner, industry partner and university partner institutions. Some of the things that I find sort of that really resonate with me, and some of the things that I've been looking into are like the Google IT certs. So Google IT, Google Project Management, Google Data Analytics, and Google UX. I thought those were, from a personal perspective, I thought that they're quite nice and can resonate with learners at times. I'm currently taking the Facebook social media marketing because I work cross-functionally with a lot of marketers. And so I thought that it would be good to know sort of what it was that they did so that as I'm talking to them and I need help, I can at least explain things in their language, right? And it can help me get to my outcomes a lot faster if I know what it is that they do. I don't need to be an expert marketer, but I need to know a little bit about what it is that they're doing. So those are some of the things that are on the platform. We have things like Python for everybody from the University of Michigan. I've taken that one as well. I've enrolled into some of the courses in there, and I quite like them. The cool thing about a lot of our courses is that they do have in-browser coding experiences, and so you can practice inside of it. I'm also enrolled in the Google IT automation with Python, and I'm in there and I'm writing my scripts and everything like that, and they're they're auto graded. They give me the feedback immediately. So I learn by doing. I learn by practicing. And that's really important, because not only by practicing do I gain the confidence to know that this is something that I can do, but it also helps me if I ever need to explain to somebody. There's theoretical concepts. I earned a CompTIA Security Plus and a Network Plus certification. And a lot of the concepts are really theoretical to me because I'd never practically applied them. I just managed teams that did it. And so this is very different. I could talk at high level themes about network IT and security and things like that, but I would never be able to go into the weeds and tell you, like, this is the subnet you need to use, or this is how you're going to do this. When I'm doing these courses, and the ones that I'm enrolled in, at least, I gain that confidence that, I know how to write a script. I actually write them. And so it's very powerful because, when you get asked a question, especially in an interview, sometimes, you kind of need to know how to do what it is that you say you know how to do. You know what I mean? So, you get to practice. And for me, I gain confidence. And so Google IT, like I said, I think that from a personal perspective, I like the topic areas. Salesforce and the SB Academy have this one called Salesforce Sales Development Representative. And, I like that one a lot too, just in terms of exposure to what is an SDR. That's one of those really entry level roles within a company. Every company has them, for the most part, inside sales, SDR, whatever you want to call them. But that's a great into a company. And then, who knows where you end up from there? Maybe you go into product marketing, maybe you go into product management, maybe you go into sales, who knows? Great entry level, into that world, and really allows you to get your feet wet. Do you actually like this? And so I think that's pretty cool.
You know what? That's 100% true, because a lot of people want to get into a certain industry and they don't realize what comes along with that. And to, like, in sales, for example, what you were just talking about, I mean, or any type of industry, there's a lot of things that you have to learn, that learning them may not be as desirable as you realize. So getting that education, you actually can get a better understanding if this is something you really want to get into and spend, a career doing. So I understand what you're saying with that. And as a former commissioned officer, I know that mentoring can be rather frustrating and difficult because it takes a certain explanation of long range clarity with personal goals. So did you ever master, or how do you convince a young service member or military spouse that investing in yourself today educationally is absolutely critical?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when I was a commissioned officer, and I remember as I was getting out, I remember one of my soldiers was thinking about getting out as well. A couple of them were actually. And I remember they said, well, sir, and I kept trying to convince them that it wasn't, not that it wasn't a good idea, but I was trying to get them to think through their decision.
Right.
Probably something I should have been doing. But anyway, I was trying to get them to think through their decision, because ultimately their success was the most important thing to me. One of the things I didn't mention earlier, but the other thing that you learn as a commissioned officer, as a leader in general, is just emotional intelligence, especially downrange in Afghanistan or Iraq. You have to be able to interpret people's feelings.
Oh, yeah.
You have to be able to see them. And all of that is sort of like really, really powerful in sort of this mentorship category as well, because, and just, reading other people. So yeah, I left that out, but a lot of folks that are probably going to be listening and may have those as well. And so that's a really key feature of the things that you learn in the military that you may not be aware of. Is sort of that ability to pick up on things. But back to the question: how do you get them to think about their investing in themselves? It's kind of hard, and I say this because when you're getting out of the military, you're thinking about getting out of the military. I can't speak for everybody, but I will say from anecdotally, most of the people I've talked to, it's, unless you're retiring, a lot of times it's coming from some reason. Like there's a reason. There's frustration. There is this idea that life is better on the other side. There is this. You want, regular life back, or whatever it is, right? Like you have these ideas in your head, and so you need to get through them. And so sometimes it's hard to convince somebody that they should listen to you. And that's one of the things that, I found going through TAP was that, I was so frustrated at that point that I just wanted everybody to leave me alone, and I just wanted to get out. The consequences, whatever. And so as I go back to this conversation of trying to convince my soldiers to think through their decision, it is kind of hard, but investing in yourself is a powerful tool. And the reason why I say that is because most people that, at least most of the people that I've been around that are successful, are continuously curious and they're continuously persistent. And so whether you think that continuing to learn is something that's going to get you to an outcome that you're looking for later on in life, that's to be seen. But the idea is that you're going to continue learning and you're going to create this habit of learning. And so when new things come up or new challenges come up, you're going to be persistent and you're going to be curious. And you're going to be curious enough to find out and you're going to be persistent enough to figure it out. And so when we think about how do you convince somebody, difficult, right? But framing it in a way that they understand that they have to understand the consequences of not investing in yourself. And a lot of times it's a little, too little, too late at the very end. You don't want to get to the very end, or you don't want to be getting ready to make that move, moving from base to base and thinking about, well, what am I going to do next? Finding out that long-term strategy, what do I want to do? Where do I want to be? What technologies do I want to explore is going to be very, very helpful. Because while you're in the military, you can help craft those scenarios. Every single interview I've ever been in has asked me a scenario-based question. Every single one of them. I mean, I even interviewed like at an Adidas outlet store one time, and they asked me scenario-based questions. And so you're never going to get away from those. The things that you learn in these, as you continue to invest in yourself, you're going to learn the way that the corporate world talks about these things. And you're going to be able to more easily relate the experiences that you had and be able to come up with these top scenarios that you can always talk about. And you can always sort of do that STAR method off of, right? So investing in yourself is hugely important. Continuing to learn and continuing to be, curious is the best way to do it. I don't know that you can ever convince somebody to invest in themselves if they don't want to, but really helping them to understand the consequences of what happens if you don't are kind of important.
You are so insightful. That whole STAR method you just mentioned, you'd be surprised how many people don't know how to use that properly and how much that is such a game changer. That is something that I have taught people to use. And they're like, wow, like their heads explode. Like, wow, where has this been my whole life? So what do you say to that veteran out there who's thinking to themselves, well, my position doesn't require any additional certifications. I got the job. So why would I obtain any potentially relevant online certs?
Yeah, so it's again a question of preference. When you're in this mindset of continuously learning and being continuously curious and continuously persistent, it sort of naturally follows that you're gonna go attempt to obtain these these certifications and qualifications. Now, having a job today doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have a job tomorrow.
Absolutely.
And I think the last year was really kind of highlighted that for a lot of people, that it's not always going to be there, and you're not always going to know what it is that you're going to be doing in 1 month from now, 2 months from now, because you don't know what's going to happen. Investing in yourself is very, very important. And one of the quickest ways to demonstrate that you know something is to have some sort of a certification or qualification that speaks to it. So I have a PMP that tells somebody that looks at me, at my, just glossing over me, this person has at least 3 years as a project manager, and this person has met all of the requirements and understands project management enough, right? So that tells them, without me ever telling them a single word, that I have this understanding. When you start getting into things like a CCNA or CCNT or something like that, with some of these networking qualifications, you really start thinking about, okay, what level is this person at that they can pass these tests and qualifications? And so that's sort of your way of, when you talk about getting in the door, that's a way to talk about your experience with never actually having spoken a single word to a person. When they're searching for you on LinkedIn and they're searching for specific people, or they're searching for specific qualifications, these are the types of things that become important. Now, your question was really around that person that has the job today, and why do they need to continue to feel that way? And I'll reiterate it, because you don't know what is going to happen today or tomorrow. So my niece is like, I think she's 13 now, and I try to explain to her all the time. And this is just me being the uncle that I am, right? She wants to do all of these great things in life. She wants to be an animator. I'm like, that's fantastic,
Yeah.
Start thinking about what you're going to do. Start looking at people and like I said, she's 13, right? She doesn't know what LinkedIn is, but start looking and see what path people took in order to get to the company that they're at. I was like, and you'll find a pattern of people after you research enough of them. For animators, it looks like a lot of them start off as contractors.
Right.
Knowing, what it is that you're going to be getting into is going to be very, very important. And so having a portfolio of work, having a certification or a qualification of some sort that says that, it's going to make it easier for people to find you. And ultimately, that's what you want. You want to be found. We talked about earlier that I wasn't looking for a new role, but I found the role that is my passion, just based off the fact that I had a CSM, certified Scrum Master cert, and a project management cert, and I had enterprise in my title. Like that is one of those things. You don't know what the future can be, what in the future can be unlocked for you by having these types of things. So finding something where, that are industry aligned to what you continue to think about doing. If you're a project manager, PMP, certified Scrum Master, whatever type of project management role you want to get into, but continue to do that because you also get better at your job. To be fair, I learned a lot of things going to study for these certifications that I didn't know because I just hadn't experienced them yet. So you are going to be able to take these things back and be a little bit better at your job. So sort of my piece on that.
It's incredibly right, because in the last year or so, a lot of people weren't expecting a complete shutdown. So people were left with, now what? People had to pivot or shift, or they just went unemployed. And there's so many courses available. Where should someone start? And is there a strategy?
Every person is different, of course. One of the things about us as service members and military spouses and just the military community in general is that, sometimes it's hard to pick a starting point. So finding a mentor, somebody that can help you decide what it is that you want to do. They talk about, I go to these events like, I go to these like LinkedIn Mill City that they host and Ray and Samantha and the Key and things like that. And you hear these people talking and they're telling these folks, make sure you do these informational interviews with people, find out what it is that they do, because you may find something that you want to do. Now, if you just go into a catalog, like, let's say you go to YouTube and try and figure out what it is that you want to do in life, that's going to be a little bit difficult for you to figure out. So no matter where you go, whether they have a lot of content or not, it's going to be quite difficult. Identifying, what it is that you're passionate about is going to be important. And then finding people to help guide you along the way. I sort of, like I said, in my way of ending up where I didn't realize that I had mentors that were actually sort of eventually my bosses, and they sort of helped coach me into the way that I ended up becoming, or sort of the pathway that I took. What is the strategy? The strategy is to figure out, what it is that you want to do. And if you don't know what it is that you want to do, then explore. Explore. We have, on the platform, we host content from all different sorts of things. We have everything from like, wine tasting to machine learning and deep neural networks. Pretty much anything that you want to think of is quite possibly something that you could find. And so if you want to explore, then go ahead and explore. If you've heard that cybersecurity is the way that you're going to go, then check out some cybersecurity. We partner with different nonprofits, and I know we'll get into this in a little bit, but we partner with different nonprofits that provide various levels of wraparound services, and they have access to our catalog that they can grant, assuming that you meet the requirements for that nonprofit to support you. But that's one of those ways that you can sort of explore. Find out whether you really like cybersecurity. I found out cybersecurity ain't my thing. I found out that I like a different type of internet and a different type of IT stuff. And so don't go out there wasting your money on every single thing that pops up, or because you heard it in a webinar, this is going to be the thing that's going to change your life, right? Figure out if this is what you want to do. Talk to people about that are in that role and find out if that's what you really want to do. And then continue to explore and network with those people and really see if you have and you're learning the things that you need to learn in order to be successful.
A lot of what you're saying is really relatable, and I think a lot of people are going to find the information and heed his advice. Mike is someone that's been there and done that before. He was enlisted, became a commissioned officer, had to adapt, had to change, overcoming frustration, getting in the way of yourself, and then learning how not to get in the way of yourself. All these things that you're talking about, Mike, is a lot of what veterans go through and what a lot of veterans experience. So a lot of the responses that you're saying are things that I had a hard time myself kind of putting into translation or words, like the whole adapting thing for me. I never even thought about it like that before. It sounds really simple, but very enlightening. So I understand that, as far as Act Now Education and your relation with them, or Coursera's relationship with them. So how is that relationship between Act Now Education and Coursera going thus far? In addition, what's the excitement and benefit for the military community to participate?
Yeah. So if you've never met Jay is for those of the listeners that are out there, but I think you had him on the podcast like last week or maybe the week before. So if you haven't listened to Jay is a wealth of knowledge, and Jay is an amazing individual. His whole story I remember when Jay and I first talked, we were saying the same things. He was like, I was getting ready to get out and I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I was like, man, me the same thing. Right. And so we both sort of found our way. Now he found his passion while still being in the military. I found mine definitely after being out of the military, of course. But yeah, so organizations like Act Now, they're granted access to our Coursera catalog, the enterprise catalog, I should say, which has a host of courses that they can offer. A lot of the nonprofits that we partner with do do provide some various levels of wraparound services. So whether that's mentors, transition specialists, people to sort of help you get to where you need to go. It's one thing to be educated and to understand something and to know how to do something, but it's another thing for you to be able to connect all of the dots. And so I think organizations like Jay's and Act Now Education, they do that. And the other thing that they do is they really have reach. Like they can, I talked about earlier that when I was getting ready to get out, that I didn't want to hear anything any single person had to say to me. I was ready to get out, but I was willing to listen to every single other person that had never been through this before, because they were something different. And so when you think about organizations like Jay's and the reach that he has and sort of the things that he's put together and the way that he can help people, I've looked at those documents that he puts together. He puts them on a path. And to me, that's amazing. And so I feel honored that, we could sort of plug into that and offer some, some of our, some of the catalog that we host on our platform for his learners and his clients to be able to go through and get that help. Because in the end, they talk about all these wide ranging various statistics, right? Service members, X percentage, I think it's like 45% or something like that. Don't quote me, leave their job within the first year of service or within the first year of getting out. And then it goes up to like 65% of people like within 2 years, right? So there's a lot of different reasons why that could be. Here in the Bay Area, we job hop a lot, right? If I think back to the experience I had, if I would have just taken that job, working in manufacturing, not that there's anything wrong with manufacturing, it just wasn't going to be my passion. I can only imagine what my life would have been like and how I would have never been on this pathway and how I would have probably been looking for another job. And what that does is you have the security once when you're getting out of the military, right? Like you have everything. You maybe take your terminal leave, you have this job, you get your new benefits, all of these different things. But once you quit a job, that all goes away. And so what do you do next? And so if you have a family and you have kids and things like that, like that's a very, very important decision to make. Do you stay there or do you stay miserable? Or maybe not miserable, but do you stay unhappy? And so it's very important that, like I said, so I think that organizations like Jay's can help service members that may be, frustrated or maybe not know where to go, can sort of help guide that learner to find that thing that they want to do and put them on the pathway that's going to make them successful in the future. So truly, happy to be partnered with Act Now and Jay, because like I say, he's an amazing individual.
I think the number one thing with Jay and the whole Act Now education team is they challenge you. They'll ask you questions that you didn't think to ask yourself, or you're afraid to answer yourself. Everything that I tell you what, this interview, Mike, has been extremely, as I said before, enlightening to me. A lot of the things that you said, I found myself grinning and shaking my head because I know where you're coming from and I know what you're saying. And even for myself, I learned something in this last hour that we spoke about some of the things that I did when I was in the military that I didn't know how to put into words or put into a skill set. So a lot of listeners out there they're gonna identify with your upbringing, the frustration that you described, adapting and overcoming, and getting in front of yourself and getting in the way of yourself and trying to overcome those things. You going to your mom and saying, "Look, I found a way to pay for college," and she's crying while your dad is like cheering you on.
Yeah.
All these things is what a lot of people, experience. And you just mentioned right now about, leaving your first job after the first job that you get after leaving the military. Like I did that. Like I worked for a company, an aeronautics company, for just 1 year. And I just could not identify with this place and they couldn't identify with me. And I think they really tried. It was just, there was nothing there to kind of bridge that gap. There was a lot of great people that worked there that really wanted to hire military veterans. I think they just didn't understand how to handle military veterans. And so, this has been an amazing conversation, Mike. I just want to throw it out there for any listeners. If anyone's looking to connect with you, what is the best social media platform for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah. So, I'm trying to use LinkedIn more. I get on there. Sometimes it takes me a little while to answer questions or messages. Like I said, I've done PMP, I've done Agile, I've done Scrum, I've done all of those things. So if you have questions about that type of stuff, feel free to reach out and let me know. I've been in, like I said, different parts of organizations as a consultant. I worked in sales enablement, operations enablement, change management, brand new projects. I have a scope of knowledge that is pretty varied as a consultant. So I may not have every answer, but I can give you some. The other thing that I'll say is that we do have a military community group on the Coursera platform. If you go to my LinkedIn page, it's the very first post. It's a little confusing sometimes to figure out how to log in and get access, but really what I'm trying to create there is a repository of information for learners that are looking to go through online learning, right? So sometimes it can be difficult to go through online learning. Maybe you don't have the time, maybe you get confused, maybe you get stuck. So finding a place where learners can self-organize. For those of you out there that are in the Agile or Scrum world, that self-organizing thing is going to really resonate with you, right? Like you self-organize a lot of the times, and you'll find that self-organizing helps, at least in a lot of cases, solving problems, right? You self-organize this to help meet a need, and you find people to do that. So we have a military community on there, and you can go get access to the military community. I encourage everybody to just post things, whether it's the course that you're taking, are you having trouble? I can't log in, like whatever it is, right? Like I go in and I look at it, I try to answer questions. The other thing you'll find on there is a link to how to gain access to the different nonprofits that we partner with, to include, Act Now Education. Every nonprofit provides a different level of wraparound services. So finding the one that's right for you is going to be important. Not all of them are going to do what you want. Some of them are going to be more hands-on. Some of them are going to be more hands-off. If you don't want somebody, hands-on, then go for one of those. It's a little bit more hands-off. If you want somebody that's going to help you and guide you, then go to one of those. And that's the beauty of that post, is that you can find that. And then if you are having trouble, like maybe some of your listeners have thought that they got access and they don't know how to get their access if they've been invited by one of these nonprofits, we have some help articles on there with screenshots that can help walk them through. So the community is great. It's very limited right now, but with everybody's help, the more posts, the more things, we can create a repository of knowledge and really help others, not just in the online learning space, but just in general.
Yeah, I want to just simply say thank you for doing what you do and being a representative with your current employer, Coursera, and continuing to help our military community, and not just getting out and then going on with your life. You're actually turning back around and you're helping other people level up. So thank you on behalf of our military community, man, for doing that. It's kind of one of the reasons why I also started this podcast, is because, back when I got out, understood the frustrations and having to try things and fail and, have some success. And it was really frustrating. And I don't want the folks coming behind us, getting out of the military, transitioning out, to feel those same types of frustrations. And just to summarize everything up, is there anything else that you'd like to mention before we finish off the show today?
Yeah. So one, I wanted to thank you for having me on. I'm an advocate, within my own company and things like that for our veteran community and for our military spouses as well. I want to make sure our military spouses are never forgotten. They deal with a lot of challenges. They move around. They go base to base, with their spouse, and so it's really important that we keep them connected. So I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak, for the opportunity to share my experiences. The last thing I'll say is that when it comes to thinking through that job and things like that, find out what you're passionate about. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to figure that out. When I was working as a consultant, although I enjoyed the work, maybe I didn't align as much, making my contributions were making them successful, of course, right? Like all of us, we still had jobs. So by default, we were helping making them, make them successful. But, it really took me to think about, okay, well, am I really passionate about the problem that they're solving? And if I'm not as passionate about the problem that they're solving, is there something else about this company that makes me want to stay here? Not the consulting firm, but the company that we consulted for, right? Like, is there something about it? And so eventually that's how I made my way to online education and online learning, but really figuring out what you're passionate about and finding out that your passion may lie in other things, even, maybe inside of that company, maybe inside of another one. But if you're not passionate about what you do and you don't believe in what you do, it's going to be really hard to continue to put forth that effort. I mean, when we think about what we did in the military, it was frustrating sometimes, but we believed in what we did. And that's, a lot of times that can help continue to drive you.
The honor's all on this side of the mic, and I really appreciate you giving us the time today. And with that being said, we're going to wrap up the show. Mike, I really appreciate your time today. Everyone, thank you for listening to the show today. I'm KP, and we're out. and we're out. You've been listening to the Morning Formation Podcast. I hope you found today's materials helpful and of value to your current situation. You can connect with me on Instagram at the_morning_formation_podcast, or you can connect with me via email at theformationpodcaster@gmail.com. Also, I would like to thank my partners at Act Now Education for their support. Authenticity, community, and trusted is what you can expect from all members of the Act Now Education team. You can link up with them today and learn about some new, free educational resources on their Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or at their website, actnoweducation.com. Whether today's show took you back to a nostalgic time or helped you think about tomorrow, thank you for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you again. Stay safe and stay motivated. Warriors, fall out.